welcome to the Children's Media Conference 2025. It's been 22 years and we're still here, surviving and determined to thrive. Our ability to return year after year is due to the many people who support the conference. The advisory committee who put together the conference program, our army of session producers who work for months to shape the best possible content, and our speakers and moderators who give their time free of charge to share what they know. Also the CMC team based here in Sheffield who make it happen on the day. That's the core team who organise the conference, but also all of the people that come together in the last few weeks to run individual sections, such as the International Exchange, which I think many of you may have been at today. I'd like to extend a big welcome to our international guests. Thank you so much. And here are our patron sponsors who provide the backbone of support for the CMC. Akamar Films, CBBC, CBeebies and BBC Studios Kids and Family, Cartoon Network and Cartoonitu, Disney Junior and Disney Television Animation, 560 Media, Carrot, Magic Light Pictures, Milkshake on 5 and Nickelodeon, Sky Kids, Wild Brain, Wild Child Animation and YouTube Kids. Thank you to all of you. We are very, very grateful. And last, but definitely not least, a huge thank you to our sponsor for this opening keynote, NBC Universal Global TV Distribution. Yes. Some of our sponsors have stepped up for the first time this year, which has frankly been a lifesaver. Thank you very much to all of you. Our conference theme this year is Shake It Up, and our speaker tonight has been shaking up content for kids and people in general since he started out as a writer over 35 years ago. Frank Cottrell-Boyce is no stranger to the CMC. He first joined us after having written the opening ceremony for the 2012 London Olympics. Who will ever forget that joyous and inspirational story celebrating the history and culture of the United Kingdom, captured in a 4-hour spectacular, Isles of Wonder. 12 years later, in 2024, Frank was made Waterstones Children's Laureate, a once-in-a-lifetime honour that only comes to celebrated writers or illustrators. Frank has written for television and films, but he has said that the thing he cares about most is writing and reading stories for children. His mission as Laureate reveals his passion for the emotional connections we make when we read stories with children, a passion that may have started when, as a teenager, he performed Punch and Judy shows to excited young audiences at local fetes. In his first year as Children's Laureate, Frank has worked with the charity Book Trust to launch a reading rights campaign, which sets out practical proposals to ensure that all young children get the chance to experience someone reading stories to them. This campaign is changing the way that we think about the relationships we form when we read with children, arguing that the experience of having somebody reading a story to you should be a universal right for every child and not a privilege. As well as his work with the Book Trust, Frank is a lifetime patron of the Children's Media Foundation. He has previously voiced his concerns around children's access to age-appropriate media content that reflects their own lives and communities. And he is also concerned about the way we construct media content for children and whether it is paced in a way that allows them to absorb the story and to think about what they're watching. I've no doubt that these are some of the topics that Frank will be addressing this evening as he kick-starts our discussions over the next couple of days. But before we welcome Frank to the stage, as always, we have a wonderful support act to open the conference. 10 years ago, in 2015, the CMC launched its Changemaker strand. To date, we've provided a platform for 93 inspirational and insightful speeches and videos from young people advocating for change. From environmental campaigners to disability advocates, tech innovators to creative prodigies, many have gone on to be leading experts in their fields since speaking here in Sheffield. In this, our 10th Changemaker anniversary year, we have another 7 young people sharing their views on the world with us. You may have already seen the pre-conference videos from the Derby College media literacy campaigners, audio description advocate Eleanor Stollery, and youth social activist Cole Jacola. Today's 99th Changemaker comes from the #IWill movement, a UK-wide initiative empowering young people to take social action and make a positive difference to their communities. In 2020, she began a personal account of the Black Lives Matter protests in Washington, D.C. And by 2025, she was running the Be the Change network, a youth-led platform dedicated to sharing stories, amplifying the underrepresented voices, and championing young change makers, including some of our own. Children's Media Conference 2025. Please welcome Lily Mott.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. It is such an honor to be here with all of you today at the Children's Media Conference and to be speaking alongside someone as inspiring as Frank Cottrell-Boyce. My name is Lily Mott, and I am the founding director of Be the Change Media Network, a youth-led podcast network that amplifies the voices of young people around the world. Our mission might sound simple, and maybe even something you'd expect to be common by now, but unfortunately, it is not. In fact, we're the only podcast network in the world led by young people. And that's exactly the issue I'm here to talk about today. Too often, the media talks about young people, framing us as problems that need to be fixed, risks that need to be managed, or stereotypes constantly being reinforced. But what if you stopped talking about young people and started talking with us? What if we all work together to create spaces where we can tell our own stories in our own voices? That's what I'm trying to create at Be the Change Media Network. Let's start with an alarming statistic that drives the work we do. Research from NACRO, released in November 2024, found that media coverage of young people under the age of 25 is twice as likely to be negative than it is to be positive. In the negative coverage, young people were portrayed as lazy, weak, selfish, and dangerous. And yet, only 21% of the stories about young people actually include young people's voices. Think about that. The media shapes how society views young people, but most of the time, it does so without even talking to us. I launched our flagship podcast on the network, Be the Change Podcast, 5 years ago to address that exact problem. I was interning in Washington, D.C. when George Floyd was murdered, and protests broke out across the United States and around the world. After work, and with a bit of encouragement from my dad on the phone, thanks, Dad, I made my way to the White House to the protests unfolding there. I arrived at Lafayette Square Park and started recording audio from the Black Lives Matter protest on my phone. As the afternoon turned to night, Donald Trump issued a warning to protesters to clear out of the park, so he could stage a photo op in front of St. John's Church. Protesters refused to leave, but remained peaceful. And similar to the events that we've seen unfolding in Los Angeles over the last few weeks, the National Guard flooded into the park, tear-gassed the crowd of peaceful protesters, and fired rubber bullets. I was overwhelmed by what happened and felt an urgency to tell the story from my own perspective. So, when I got home at 1 a.m., I recorded a voice memo on my phone, and that raw audio became the first episode of Be the Change podcast. At the time, I just wanted my family and my friends to understand what was really happening, because so much of the media coverage really focused on the destruction caused by protesters, rather than the courage and the passion of the leaders of the movement, many of whom were young people. In an effort to amplify those young leaders' voices, I turned the podcast into a platform to feature young organizers who were leading the movement. Over the next 5 years, the podcast expanded to feature interviews with young changemakers from around the world who are passionate about issues like climate change, mental health, gender equality, digital safety, period poverty, democracy, and more. I even featured a few guests who might be familiar to those of you who are CMC veterans: former CMC changemakers Bethany Hanley, Connor Warren, Elijah Mackenzie Jackson, and Zakiya Kaji. Great minds think alike, right, CMC? So if I fast forward to June 2024, I began onboarding other young storytellers to launch their own podcasts. Now, Be the Change Media Network is a team of 32 podcasters across 7 countries, producing 14 podcasts and counting. Our podcasts have reached over 42,000 downloads by listeners in 78 countries around the world, and we're only just getting started. At Be the Change Media Network, we aren't just including young people in the content we create. We're leading every aspect of the content creation process. One of the young leaders shaping Be the Change Media Network is Troy Njinjimbenga. As a Send young person, a member of the LGBTQ+ community, and a person of color, Troy has faced many challenges having his voice heard in traditional media spaces. But through his podcast, he's found the power not only to share his story, but to spotlight other young changemakers who are shaping the world around them. Let's hear from Troy in his own words.
Be the Change Media Network has allowed me to be who I am as an autistic person, to really connect with young people and to tell their story and their journey, but also my own lived experience. And podcasting has really empowered me and inspired me to make change, to connect with the young people that I interview and the change makers, to really talk about their journeys, but also my own experiences, to fit in and stand out, and self-confidence, and all of the issues that I'm passionate about, and also for them to really empower other young people to tell their story. And I've learned skills like editing, booking guests, and really because I'm really being an interviewer as well and connecting with them, and it's been empowering to be part of a network to amplify young people's voices.
Troy's story is a testament to how new media, like podcasts, can become platforms for people who have been historically silenced to finally speak and be heard. Now I want to introduce you to Skylar Jackenthal. Skylar experienced a profound loss as a young person and found support through a grief group. Those raw, honest conversations stayed with her, and now she's using her podcast to recreate that kind of space, a space where young people can speak openly about what they're going through and feel less alone in it. Skylar's work is a testament to how media made by young people can reach other young people in powerful ways. This is Skylar Jackenthal, the host of Good Grief, Life After Loss.
Hi there, my name is Skylar Jackenthal, and when I was just 14 years old, my older brother Sam tragically passed away in a ski accident. And almost instantly after losing Sam, I became hyper aware of the fact that there is a severe lack of resources for young people dealing with grief, which is crazy because grief is one of the few universal experiences that we will all go through at some point. But no one thinks about young people dealing with loss because as a young person, you're not supposed to experience loss, but the reality is we do. And that's why I created Good Grief as a safe place where young people who are grieving can come, they can relate, they can hear stories like their own, and they can know that they aren't alone in their grief journey.
Skylar's work is not just a platform to share her story, but it's also a space for people to heal, reflect, and connect. Skylar's podcast is one of many on the network, showing how storytelling is a form of support and community. And finally, let me introduce Lubeli Audrey Matsulela from Bulawayo, Zimbabwe. Through her podcast, she's opening up conversations about mental health, a topic that affects young people across the world. Young people are the experts of our own lived experience, and Lubeli's work is a testament to the power of the media to unite our generation, not just across borders, but also across shared human experience. Let's hear from Lubeli.
Thank you, Lily, and hello everyone, all protocol observed. Being a part of the Be the Change Media Network has really shaped my advocacy journey in ways I wouldn't have imagined. I've had the opportunity to engage with community leaders, mental health activists, and other storytellers in order to find out what really can be done on the ground to alleviate the dire consequences of the mental health crisis, especially on a global scale. Throughout these conversations with all these amazing people, I have learned that there really isn't one approach when it comes to addressing these pressing issues. That being said, I hope to continue collaborating with like-minded people in order to provide a safer space for the youth to speak up and get the help they need going forward. Thank you.
Troy, Skylar, and Lubelli didn't wait for someone to give them a platform to share their stories and make change. They're building their own. And in doing so, they're not just sharing stories. They're changing the narrative about what young people are capable of. But imagine what they could do with even more support. And that's where you all come in. If you're a media professional in this room, and I know many of you are, my call to you is this: mentor a young content creator. Offer your guidance, share your experience, pass the mic, and provide opportunities for young people to share their stories, if you're in a position to do so. Young people are shaping and leading the media landscape in a new, more inclusive direction, but we'd make change even faster with your support behind us. And here's another challenge. The next time you're in a room where big decisions about youth content are being made, please make sure there's a young person in that room. Not just in a tokenistic or performative way, but in a role where they're leading, shaping the vision, and influencing the content you're creating. Because if your audience is young people, but none of your decision makers are, you aren't serving your audience, you're just guessing. I know I've been shamelessly plugging Be the Change Media Network time and time again throughout this talk, but bear with me for one more plug. Members of our team are available and interested in supporting media organizations to become more inclusive of youth voices. So, if that's something you'd like to explore, I'll be here all week. Find me, let's connect. But in all seriousness, please keep this challenge in mind to always have a young person in the room whenever decisions are being made. Because when young people are included in meaningful ways, the media becomes not only more reflective of the world we all live in, but also more reflective of the world we all want to live in. Change comes through collaboration when we pass the mic and we commit to making everyone's voice a part of our story. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Well done. That was amazing. Yeah. Thank you. So we're here to shake it up and to talk about the future of children's media and to assert that it does have a future, and to think about how can we, to quote Lily, be the change? How can we get the best for our children out of the tech and media environment that's given Lily such a strong and clear and powerful voice? How can we all be a bit more Lily? How can we accept her challenge to listen to and amplify the voices of the young? So I think another round of applause for Lily there. There's a passage in Graham Greene's essay, The Lost Childhood, about the importance of cultural exposure and reading stories in early years. He says, in later life we admire, we are entertained, we may modify some views that we already hold, but we are more likely to find in stories merely a confirmation of what is already in our minds. As in a love affair, it is our own features that we see reflected flatteringly back. Got to say that is not, my love affair was not like that. But in all childhood books, in childhood, all stories are stories of divination, telling us about the future. And like the fortune teller, I think this is a really important thing actually, and like the fortune teller who sees a long journey in the cards, they influence the future. For the last year, as UK Children's Laureate, I've been visiting nurseries, hospitals, family hubs, prisons, seeking out the best, the most inspiring practice in early years. So when I say I've been visiting early years settings, thinking about Graham Greene, what I'm saying is I've been time traveling to the future. So much of what I read and watched as a child not only influenced me, but was designed to influence me. I wrote this on the blurb for the CMC yearbook, so I'm just going to reuse it. Blue Peter explained the world, Oliver Postgate dreamed us a better world, and Doctor Who took me out of this world. But there's a doubleness to those moments when we read to or watch with our children. We are pointing them towards the future, but we are also inevitably looking into our own past. These moments are so powerful that no matter how old we grow, we never really escape their gravity. Proust thought a bit of cake dipped in tea could open the floodgates of memory. Imagine what he would have written if he'd lived to hear the clangers singing. It was really sad to hear last week actually that Dan Postgate, Oliver's son, passed away. He did that relaunch of the clangers in 2015. If you want to understand the magic of words, I can make a room full of people of a certain age sigh with affection and longing with two simple words: Derek Griffiths. Brian can't. I didn't think I was going to work as well as that, actually. I could do that all day. So when we read or watch with our children, we create this little eddy, this little swirl in the space-time continuum where past and future meet. When I started at university, my college had just gone mixed. So there were 30 women and there were 320 men. And I was outnumbered, you know. That was the first time I'd ever met posh people. I had no idea how big posh people were. I showed my daughter our graduation photograph recently, and she went, "You look like a friggin' borrower." So basically, the odds were very stacked against me. And there was this girl there that I instantly adored and fell in love with. And she already had a boyfriend, which, you know, given the sex ratio, seemed a bit overcautious and unnecessary. Like taking a Freddo to Cadbury's World. It's true, it's all true. And I couldn't, so I had no purchase on her, and all I could do was like create these this field of conversational resonance around her, hoping that something would catch, you know, and she would say, "Oh, Frank, yes, you're right, the economic base does determine the cultural superstructure. Kiss me, Frankie." Which didn't happen. At some point, she mentioned Tom's Midnight Garden. And I don't remember reading Tom's Midnight Garden. And I think I probably hadn't read it at this point. I'd probably come across it on Jack and Ori or seen the BBC dramatisation in 1974. But I do remember when Tom's Midnight Garden began to mean something to me, and it was then. Because she was talking about the skates. Does anyone remember what happened with the skates in Tom's Midnight Garden? This amazing thing that Tom travels into the past, and on one of his trips, he sees Hattie, his companion, ghostly, spectral companion, skating, and he can't go skating with her. And they have this conversation about it, and she says, "When I grow out of the skates in the 19th century, I'll put them under the floorboards in the cloakroom, and then in the future you can find them." And he does. And they go skating together on the same pair of skates. And she was like obsessed with this moment, and this was my kind of big opportunity. It's the best metaphor for memory that I've ever heard. Because memory in one sense is this space under the floorboards where we store stuff, but it's also something that can erupt back into the daylight and send us speeding over the ice. And I'm sure you want to know the end of the story, so we did get married. And we're still married. And I've got to say, memories like that conversation still erupt into the daylight and allow us to skate over some very thin ice. So I said I've been around all these early settings, and I'd like to share one with you. This is a film from a school very near me, St. Francis de Sales, which is sort of in Bootle. So can we see the film, please?
We know as teachers how important it is for children to read. Reading is just the crux of everything. When you're reading for pleasure, it's a nice, calming, nurturing feeling for them. We do what we can to show the children how important reading is and to build that love of reading, so hopefully they go home and can read with their families. I think some of it is confidence with parents as well. Some of them aren't confident readers themselves, and they certainly aren't confident when it comes to helping their child to read. So we do workshops.
The enjoyment in the faces when they're doing it, like it might only be like a 5-minute story or a 10-minute story, but I just find it like so important for them. It just makes you feel happy and like wholesome after it. I was really surprised when my kids started school to learn that some kids have never actually had a book. For kids not to have had that, like they're just missing out on so much.
There's a lot of deprivation in the area. It's in the top 1% of deprived areas in the country. So a lot of children are coming to school without good levels of speech and language. They don't always have books. There was a child who came into nursery once and saw a book when he first joined nursery and said, "What's that?" They love the stories. We read them in small chunks and then repeat the story a lot. They've completely embraced the story by the end of the week. So we do everything we can, and hopefully that'll have a knock-on effect on the children and their families.
My elder son, he was born in India. So when he came here, he was having difficulty because everyone is talking in English. He can't speak to anyone. He don't have any friends. So he started liking books. He started reading. Now he has a lot of friends. He knows the importance of reading now.
These kids are learning so much more than vocabulary. They're learning how to sit, how to relate to each other, how to watch for each other, and how to be happy. That little book, The Gruffalo, which takes like 5 minutes to read, they got a really big session out of it. And in that session, she created this zone of play in which so much more was going on than literacy, reading, or vocabulary. There was so much more happening emotionally, so much more happening verbally. It was just amazing.
We want to promote that love of reading as early as we can. It's just the start here with us in early years, but we know how important it is for them to have a successful life.
Part of what I wanted to say, and it's not, I want to say it just boldly in case it's not clear enough in the screen, is that often when we talk about books, it's opposed to screens, and that keeps coming up. I want to keep reminding ourselves and remembering what a dynamic relationship there has always been between books and broadcasting, and how they pollinate each other and how enrich each other, and that's a really important thing to keep bearing in mind. It's been an absolute joy going to all these different settings, see things that make my heart sing. I also see things that make my heart break, often on the same day. British children have been at the sharp end of a series of crises. The pandemic, obviously, but before that, and I think much more damagingly, ultimately, the austerity. In the last 12 months, I've learned a whole list of hyphenated poverties that I didn't know existed before. Food poverty, hygiene poverty, bed poverty. How are we at that point where we've got kids with no beds? And what does a bedtime story mean in that context? I've seen schools that have got food banks, schools that have got their own laundrettes, where the teacher has to come up to a kid who can see that what state their clothes are in and say, "Oh, you've spilled something, shall I wash it so your mum doesn't have to?" The whole etiquette of dealing with that. Schools that are back to outside toilets, that's become completely commonplace. It sometimes feels like I'm walking through the aftermath of a war on children. Rachel D'Souza, the Children's Commissioner, got a new report out today. 4.5 million of our children are in poverty. And one of the things that she leans into in that report is how normalized that is, how that vocabulary, when kids talk about poverty now, it's not abstract in the children that they talk to. It was like, it had been normalized. And that made me think of why I became a children's writer. I was very happy being a film writer. It was great fun. And I was working on, I'm going to tell you the story, okay? And I was working on, it doesn't matter what the background to this is, I was working on one of those many, many films that didn't come off. And it came out of having been, I'd made a film in the Balkans at the end of the war, and I got very interested in ethnic cleansing and was talking to children who'd had that experience. And one of the people I spoke to was a woman called Marion, who was a Roma gypsy from Switzerland. And in Switzerland, they had this policy of taking Roma gypsy children into care very young so that they'd have a chance to become better Swiss citizens. And she'd really kicked against it. When I met her, she was a kind of advocate for the interests of nomadic people at the United Nations. She was very articulate and cool and distinguished, and she'd written this great book. But her CV was that she'd been in 13 or 14 different institutions, she'd been in prison, she'd narrowly missed having a lobotomy, her own kids had been taken into care, she was rambunctious. And I remember at the end of one of those interviews saying to her, why? Why did you kick against it? You were taken into care really young. how did you know that you deserve more? How did you know that you were worth more? How did you know that life should be better than this? And she said, I read Heidi. She's amazing, isn't that an incredible thing? And you meet children now who are every bit as kind of limited and blocked up as Mariella was as a child by poverty, by ideas around race, masculinity, all those different things. That sense that there's a story that can blow those walls down, blow those prison walls down, that's what should be guiding all of us. That the first function of culture for young people should be to tell them that they deserve it all, that this world is theirs. So I just want to quickly share some of the good things that I've seen. Because I've seen amazing things. In Shireburn, which is just very near here, I've been going to a nursery that was set up by Book Trust, working with Sally Pearce from Sheffield Hallam University. And it was amazing. They had this little book group for young mums and their babies. And when I went, they explored The Very Hungry Caterpillar as though it was War and Peace. They were like, it was granular. They used it for singing, for making stuff, for counting. They just kept working away at this book until the kids had a real sense of ownership on it. And that drew the mums into the orbit of that, these very young mums into the orbit of that book. When you saw Cheryl working with the Gruffalo there, when she reads that, that's an immersive experience. You know, I felt like I was in a wood when she was doing that. And they were doing this to the next degree. The book was not a meal, the book was a recipe. It was a script, like I said, it's a script for play. And it brought all the benefits that you would expect it to bring to children, you know, extra confidence, vocabulary, all the things I was talking about. You know, they learned to sit and respect each other. But the other thing that I noticed was that it brought the mums together. They were all, you know, in the social work phrase, suffering multiple deprivations. They were poor. And poor makes you busy. You know, it might be 3 buses to the nearest Aldi or to the 3 buses to the nearest Morrison's. You spend ages looking for cheap food. It's just very, very time-consuming. And because it's time-consuming, it's really isolating. But that reading group had sprouted a little breakfast club and a food bank. They were cooking together. The Gruffalo had pulled those young women out of isolation and brought them together. And they'd found strength in each other. And that's all from The Very Hungry Caterpillar. Pleasure creates trust. Trust creates community. And community gives you strength. And to me, that's the second great function of culture, that it brings people together, which is something we should definitely have learned the value of in the last few years. Definitely, if you volunteer, as I do, at the Plaza Community Cinema, and you're there when the Minecraft film arrives. And these kids who've been in the lonely planets of their bedrooms are suddenly together, knowing what each other look like and shouting, what is it, chicken jockey at the right time, and throwing popcorn and being told off by me. Another great place that I've been to is and a highlight for me, and again, this is something that plays very much into the story of books and television and their relationship with each other. I went to the East London Baby Development Lab, which is run by Professor Sam Wass, which is the epicenter of happiness in this world. It's just this amazing place where Sam is trying to monitor what happens to babies' brains when someone who loves the baby reads to the baby. And it is transcendent. So he wires up mum's brain and the baby's brain, or the dad's brain and the baby's brain, and you watch on a monitor. And the baby's brain is like completely hectic and chaotic. And then the adult, it starts to calm down and they synchronize. And he's got this graphic where there's 2 heads and they actually come together in this kind of transcendent moment of communion. It's just so beautiful. It's sublime. And, you know, you're watching the apparatus of happiness being created in real time. This amazing kind of moment of attachment. You know, read a baby Read your baby a story and you're giving it a hug that will last the rest of its life. That's what's happening there. And his pitch is really interesting and really worth thinking about for us. Because this thing is that for a baby, life is just absolutely overwhelming. A few weeks ago, it was an aquatic creature, and now it's in East London. You know, the hell is going on? So the baby's like, oh my God, there's like a window, and there's my mum, and there's snacks, and there's a breeze, and I've got to have a sleep. You know, it's just like too much. Everything is too much. But with a picture book, or with a still picture in your hand, everything slows down. And he gets very granular about how quickly babies can process information, but like the key thing is it all slows down. And the baby is beginning to find a stable place in the world, somewhere to place its foot. And that is happening in communion with someone who loves it. Everything slows down. So what you're watching, you know, this isn't something that's like good because it improves your vocabulary or gives you cultural capital. This is something essential. This is, you're watching someone become a person at a biological level. It's an incredible privilege to watch it. And you know, the baby, like if you've ever read to a baby, I hadn't really thought about this. I've read to lots of babies. I've got 7 children, lots of grandchildren. That thing of like, the baby has a moment of agency when you read into it because it will turn the page back. It will turn the page upside down. It will bite the book. It will throw the book aside. It will demand the gruffalo. You know, that these moments of agency, that is the business of you're watching the business of becoming. So there are really solid neurological reasons for thinking about the speed of images that we show our children. If you give them a screen with something, instead of sitting down and reading, you give them a screen with stuff that's going at 25 frames a second, you know, metaphysically, I know that doesn't happen anymore, but effectively 25 frames a second. That's a completely different thing. You're adding to the hectic chaos in the brain. So there's something really, it's a very personal thing, but like something really important about stop motion. Stop motion animation is like picture books. You know, there's something really special and organic about stop motion. That's why I love Tweety and Fluff. That's a show that's doing something really valuable. So I came away from that visit with I've been to about 3 or 4 times, so I can't keep away, but with a really enhanced and sharpened sense of the enormous power of slow storytelling, of words and pictures, of this cozy but Promethean moment between a child and a story and someone who loves that child, and of the responsibility that goes with wielding that power, which is what you all do. I picked out Tweety and Fluff just because I love it. I could have picked out a dozen great shows that have got that magical thing, incompleteness, gaps in the story that the child has to fill in, that its imagination goes into to fill in those gaps, gaps that encourage conversation, gaps that encourage the child to lean in and be part of the story. I love that great stop motion animation tradition, Noggin, all the way to Paddington. But, and I guess this is what the conference is for, that's hard to make. It's hard to finance. It's hard to find a home for. YouTube is so dominant that it's more or less a monopoly as far as children are concerned. I had the stats for this, but I've lost them. But I know that basically kids watch YouTube and they don't really watch anything else. And that's where they go to view stuff. So if you're hidden away, you know, because of the way you finance, if you end up hidden away on a catch-up service, you're never going to get that cultural traction that makes you part of the national conversation or the national children's conversation. Oh my God, actually, in that baby lab, there's one room where he's got like little baby chairs in a circle. So when they have like meetings, baby meetings. Because they do, because babies recognize each other, right? They do. Like a baby sees a baby, it goes, oh, it's so good. Anyway. Do I know you? And as you know, conundrum is it's very difficult to make stuff for YouTube that pays, and that great work takes graft and money. So how are we going to square? That's the big question. It is the economic base determines the cultural superstructure, just like I said. That she completely ignored me. Great work takes graft and money. How do we square that circle of making something expensive for a free-to-view platform that is not a public service broadcaster? Oh, there's the stats. 90% of children aged 3 to 15 access media content on YouTube. It's almost impossible to make a living out of that. That's partly down to the algorithm and partly down to some of the choices that YouTube will make in their strategic goals. To quote one program maker, I'm not going to say who, it's like trying to swim with your hands and feet tied and with a weight around your middle. I'd like to quote something that Anna Holmes said in an interview for Richard Marston's forthcoming book, The Box of Delights. You can't look back. This is how it is. This is what we've got to deal with. Can't look back. It was a different world. All you can do is hope that someone will at some stage be able to go into another rebirth because that's what it needs. You have to defy the laws of physics, like making that go in there. What would that rebirth look like? We could ask Lily. Anna said, don't look back. It made me think of Orpheus, who sang his way into the darkest place in search of Eurydice. The moment he looked up, he lost her. We need to keep singing, and we need to keep trusting, and we need to get going forward. There's the looking back that comes from nostalgia, the Derek Griffiths effect. A pause for a sigh. There's another kind of looking back, not nostalgic, but a kind of predictive spelling, commissioning based on what's already worked, looking back at the last big thing and trying to do it, to quote the Teletubbies, again. I always think of John Cooper Clarke, where Parkinson meets Michael Caine again and again and again and again. In England, they're England. Orwell talks about how the British always start every war with a disaster because they expect the next war to be like the last one, and they prepare accordingly. Even at this moment, he wrote in 1941, thousands of men are being trained with the bayonet, a weapon entirely useless except for opening tins. Terry Pratchett's got this brilliant riff on that. Do you remember this? I think it's in, I don't know what it's in, Pyramids? I don't know. Where he imagines the Greeks besieging Troy a second time, but with a whole herd of Trojan horses. And the Trojans are like, nah. So even if these difficult times, if you're a commissioner or a creator, be brave. I know that money is short and times are hard, but there's a point at which being risk-averse becomes cultural rather than strategic. And if we lose the habit of taking risks, that's the most dangerous risk of all. If we're going to beat the algorithm, you mustn't think like an algorithm. Actually, there's a brilliant piece in today's New Scientist about how general AI can't cope with Generation A because it doesn't understand what they're saying. You know, all those phrases about, leading character energy and demure and all that, I don't even know. It's like, I don't know what's going on here and it can't predict. So we just have to be more human and we have to have faith that, humanity. I keep thinking about Jeff Hennington, who used to be head of AI at Google, who in 2015 said, it's time to stop training radiographers. Okay? He was really, really wrong about that. You can be wrong. You can, big tech tends to overpromise to attract investment. We have to kind of keep faith in our own humanity. One of the reasons that sometimes the world changes without you noticing it. One of the reasons that my own memories of childhood TV are so anchored in my heart and soul is that they were charged with longing because you didn't get to see it again. I couldn't wait for the next episode of Grange Hill. In 1970, I think, I saw an East German film that the BBC had bought, chopped up and dubbed for Tales from Europe. It was called The Singing Ringing Tree. It was absolutely terrifying. And it scarred my generation completely. But we didn't see it again until we were adults, when it sort of came back as a movie after the Cold War had finished. And in the meantime, you'd think you dreamed it. I bonded with people who remembered it. I was in a band at one point that was named after it. It was sort of a huge thing that was remarkable by its absence. No child will ever experience that kind of yearning. Because one of the wonders of YouTube is that it's made everything available. It has removed the pastness of the past. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying it's a thing, and we need to consider what it might mean. Because part of that longing is part of that dynamism of the relationship between books, stories, tradition, and TV. That mutual relationship between books or brands and television. Lots of the great writers of that period had a double career. people who were like worked in television and books and crossed back and forth between one and the other. I'm thinking of Joan Aiken and Helen Creswell. And one of the highlights of my career was being invited to help write that sketch between Paddington and the Queen. If you think of how long that took and how many different manifestations Paddington had had, and attained that sort of patina of yearning and love and association over the years. That's, that it was a story on Jackanory, then it was this very innovative little animation with a fluffy Paddington and hand-drawn backgrounds and hand-drawn humans, and Michael Hordern's voice. I'm going to say Michael Horden. Michael Horden. Get a sigh. That's a really sort of, that's not picking up a recognizable IP and sticking it on the screen, is it? That's a sort of dynamic, growing, mutually enriching experience that ultimately leads to, the greatest film of all time, Paddington 2. What are you laughing at? It's in your hands. I think children's television has always been at the cutting edge. If you think how innovative that little Paddington thing was, how mad it could be, how we imagined, that generation of TV makers imagined new worlds, new ways of seeing out of, sticky back plastics and cut out Vikings. If you want to imagine the future, we could start by looking at Lily. And actually, do you know what? One thing I want to say. You could also talk about jobs. So when I go to Francis de Sales now and schools like that, I always talk about jobs in the media because they're not on most kids' radar. And I talk about all the kind of jobs that you do on a film set that feel like ordinary jobs, like being an electrician, being a joiner, being someone who's into makeup or catering or accountancy or security. All those jobs are more interesting on a film set. And I think we need to sort of talk about, well, yeah, they are. It's more interesting, like taking electricity to the North Pole than it is taking it to, number 42 Privet Road or whatever. And I'm really, really passionate about it. My last book is called The Blockbusters, and it's about kids who end up on a film set, and it comes from taking my kids onto film sets and them going, what is that job that guy is doing? So that's another place that we can start renewing things, is like look out to where you can get people's, reach into those communities that don't know about this, that are not signposted towards this. Actually, in St. Francis de Sales, I did this rant, and it's near the new Everton Stadium. And I said, that stadium, that was a huge building, that's like a film set. There'll be mad jobs on there that no one's considered. You should go and get someone to come on. And then the next time I went, I said, did you get anyone from the stadium? She went, yeah. I said, who did you get? She went, the falconer. They've got a falconer to keep the pigeons in their eyes. Like, the kids were like, what? So they are our future, we need to get them into the equation. To quote Nick Cave, I'm going to quote Nick Cave. I always like quoting Nick Cave. Maybe AI can write a better song than I can, but that is not the point. Art is all about our faults, our failings, our frailties as human beings. Art is the distance we travel from our failings. That is what's so awesome, that we deeply flawed creatures can sometimes do astonishing things. I feel really optimistic. I think I'm constantly talking to people who talk about the digital world as though it's some kind of dystopia that's swallowing our children, some terrible kind of Pied Piper that's leading them into the secret mountain. I just think there's always a time lag, isn't there, when a new tech comes along. I always think, this is terrible, if you visit mills in the northwest of England, there's always this it was horrible, children worked here and they were components of machines. Yeah, they were, but people, when that started, they didn't know that children shouldn't work because children had always worked. But they'd worked alongside their parents in fields, in the open air, and they'd worked in rhythm with the seasons. And obviously it was backbreaking and impoverishing and limited your expectations, but it wasn't actually cruel in the sense that being part of a machine was. And we kind of drifted into that without people noticing. And then Lord Salisbury and people come along and go, this isn't right, guys. And we changed the law. And I think we're maybe in that catch-up moment where our kids are working. They're being harvested for their data day long. All the time that you think they're just scrolling, they're adding to the great machine. They're adding to the Mechanical Turk. They are being harvested. They are mining. And I think we're at the point where we're going to say, well, actually, do you know what? we should change that, because this is a moment. You know, this is a moment. I really think this is a moment. We've got good news. The Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee is going to hold a full inquiry this autumn into the future of children's media. We expect them to be calling representatives of the... You can tell I'm reading this, this is not my thing. We expect them to be calling representatives of the big tech companies to ask them to explain their strategies for serving the needs of children and young people. They decided to hold the inquiry based on the Children's Media Foundation's submission in February, which requested a one-day inquiry, but got rejected because they thought a one-day inquiry would not be enough, and they're going to have a full inquiry instead. So I think a huge round of applause for the Children's Media Foundation. So what are we going to do if we've got this moment? What are we going to do at this moment? We're going to shake it up. Because it's worth remembering that behind the big Czech beasts, there are people. There are people with children, people who children want, people who have ideals, people who wish us well. And we can say to them, come here, you big, frail, flawed beings. Take our hands, come with us, and we'll do something astonishing. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Frank for that amazing talk. We have time for some questions. So, any questions out there? And I will, if the lights change, yes, I will. We have one down here. If we could start there, please.
Hello, Mr. Frank. It was so incredible to hear you say all of that, like the humor and all of the insights. So firstly, thank you so much for sharing it. My name's Joyce. I'm an animation director, and I really loved how you touched on the impact that these telephone, like the videos that watch have on babies. I know I have like a cousin who's 10 months old and uses his grandfather's finger to scroll on YouTube. So I was just wondering if you could also talk about how these videos influence the belief systems of these children, because you also mentioned how they form who we become as adults. So if you could just expand on that and how all these stories that we are seeing right now shape our minds.
I think that we're shaping us in ways that we don't really understand as yet. All I know is that if it's shared, that's a huge difference. You know, if we make programs that invite participation, that's very different from the kind of nightmare of the electronic babysitter. Do you know? I'm saying it so to me, it's things like with stop motion where you've got to kind of lean into it a little bit. We're talking about little people here, yeah. And I don't think we've accounted for the changes that have happened. Sometimes, like I said, big changes happen without us noticing. One of them that I should have mentioned was that frictionlessness. That's, you know, part of what Sam talks about is rhythm. You know, that when you read the Gruffalo, it's the rhythm that gets you, and the repetition. Kids love it when you do the same thing over and over again. There's never been a truer word than the ones in the Teletubbies where they say again and again. Because kids love to have the same thing over, don't they? I had a daughter, every time we went to a bookshop, she'd say, we've got this book at home. And to go, yeah. Can we buy it? It's like what? So it's that, but that frictionlessness that's another thing that I don't think we've thought about enough, about what does that mean, that you just flow as opposed to have these moments. Yeah, I hope that was a bit waffly, wasn't it?
Any more questions out there? Yes, I can see one down here. Anyone else as well? Yes, so there's a couple at the back there, if you can tee those up.
I'm Jules. I'm a volunteer at the conference. I'm an animation student at Sheffield Hallam. And I was just wondering if you had any kind of advice as to how young people can get into the children's media industry, and what you would say to them to kind of get in on it.
I'm not the right person to ask that, because...
volunteering. You're doing the right thing straight away.
Yeah, always go nearer to the thing that you dream, isn't it? It's like take the worst job that gets you on your journey and don't be deflected from your journey, I think, and make stuff. You know, just never stop making stuff. I think that's the thing.
Thank you.
Right. There are a couple at the back there.
Hi there, my name is Eddie Gamara. I'm here from Los Angeles. I'm moderating a panel tomorrow on literary adaptations. So Frank, thank you so much for your teaching kids about the different job opportunities on set. I have long advocated to my publishing friends to include end credits in the back of a book in order to teach kids
That's great.
how many people have been involved in the creation of that book.
Yeah.
Would you do me a favor and talk to your publishers?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And advocate for end credits in the back of a book.
Absolutely. Those kids at Francis de Sales, I made them watch all the credits for Paddington, which is like, I think it's 1,200. It's 1,200 people. Yeah, 100%. 100%. And all those jobs are amazing, you know? Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Thank you for what you're doing.
If we could take the question down here, and then if in that region back there, I saw another hand. If you could raise it again, then the runner can find you. But we'll come down here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. I had a question. So my name is Leah. I work at Peppy Agency. That is an agency focused on how to convey empathy and how to help with social and emotional learning in kids' products and digital experiences especially. So I was really interested when you said that books and digital platforms should kind of work hand in hand and it shouldn't be one or the other. But I think something that's very challenging is how to do that in practice, because I feel like sometimes digital platforms almost pull in the opposite direction of in-person connections and social skills.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't squared that circle. That's kind of what I'm doing this year. I think one of the things I've found is that a lot of parents feel intimidated by the quality of what's on screen, that they can't compete with it. So, I mean, I'm talking to governments and that I'm going to lots of places to try and kind of explain that those two things can work together and that you do have something. I went to, got to say this, we had this big, it doesn't matter. I went with a GP who I know, who has a big medical practice in Kirby. Kirby's like a huge satellite town of Liverpool, but it has a reputation. All my cousins live there. And he made me go to this group that he'd started as a reading group for these young mums. And we took Dear Zoo with us. And talking about empathy, Dear Zoo is a book, these really great books model behavior, don't they? So like Dear Zoo is a book about frustration, because this kid keeps writing to the zoo for a pet and they keep sending him wildly inappropriate pets. And, you know, or Where the Wild Things Are is about a tantrum. So I hadn't really thought about this. And he said when we were driving up, he went, these women are hard. And also, a lot of them probably can't read. And how do we square that? How are you going to explain? And I did this little pitch about Sam Wass and what it does and everything. And straight away, one of them went, I can't read. And as soon as she said that, like 4 or 5 of them did. And it was magical. Because Dear Zoo, you don't need to read. You just learn this one sentence and say it as you turn each page, and the kid will say what the animal is, you know? And I've watched this a lot in different contexts, you know, prison and stuff. People want the best for their kids. And there's a feedback loop that if you are doing the best, you get this joy back at you, you know? So he said, you're probably going to get 20 minutes out of these. We were there for 2 hours. And I had to sign all the copies of Dear Zoo, which I did not write. I said, right, I did not write this book. I wish I had written this book. And I've been back twice since. And it was just, it's a long job, you know, but we have to do it, I think. It's just as the industry has to learn about its synergy between books and screen, I think young parents have to learn about how to manage that as well themselves. But it's there, I think, because it's real, it exists.
Thank you. I have a red light, but I think we might have time for one quick question. I think if you have one teed up there, hoping it's a quick question.
It is a quick question, yes. I'm Kristen Long. I am a lifelong musician, music director, vocal coach, performer, producer, all of it. I do it all. My question, well, first, thank you for talking about the rhythm in the story and how stories and reading really does relate to music, and that's actually our building blocks for writing songs, right, and writing lyrics. But my question is, you said you played in a band.
Oh, yeah.
What instrument did you play?
The word play is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. I
Were you
played
the dancer?
I tell you what, I played in the worst band in Liverpool, and this was in like kind of punk era, or just post-punk era, around Eric's, and we were really, really, really terrible, and people threw stuff at us, and we'd empty the place. And years later, I made a film about music called 24-Hour Party People, and I had to visit, thank you, I had to kind of interview lots of musicians, musicians who'd had proper careers in music. And I would often mention that I'd been in the worst band in Liverpool. Not one of them ever had to have a second guess. You went in that way. Not a second guess, every single one. Got it right.
Well, I encourage you to continue to play.
Oh, rhythm, guitar.
Yes.
Yeah, it's that punk era. The singer thought it was great to be confrontational. And, the worse it was, the more angry the audience was, the better. And then later, when he got sectioned, thought, I'll probably joined the wrong band there.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I think another round of applause for Frank, please.
Thank you.
Oh, that was so fun.
And in CMC tradition, we have a couple of small gifts to thank you so much for kicking off the conference this year in such style.
I think you have to go and look at that camera.
And talking of style, I think we also have to take a moment for this fantastic venue, Sheffield City Hall. Thank you. And thank you to the Mayor of Sheffield as well, and the sponsorship of Sheffield City Council for the CMC. Thank you so much for your support.